Good afternoon. This is Pavel Shtermach on UATV channel, explaining complex sins in simple terms. The International Criminal Court said it has issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin officially. On Friday, the ICC recognized Vladimir Putin and the Russian Commissioner for Children's Rights Maria Lvova-Belova as suspects in the forced deportation of Ukrainian children. At the same time, the judges made on the basis on concrete evidence, said the head of the International Criminal Court, Piotr Hofmansky. He noted that the data of the victims will remain secrets in order to protect them. At the same time, the court noted that the crimes were already committed in Ukrainian occupied territory, at least from February 24, 2022. There are reasonable grounds to believe that Putin bears individual criminal responsibility for the aforementioned crimes, for having committed the acts directly, jointly with others and/or through others, and for his failure to exercise control properly over civilian and military subordinates who committed the acts or allowed for their commission, and who were under his effective authority and control, pursuant to superior responsibility.
Nevertheless, the judges of the chamber dealing with this case decided to make the existence of the warrants public in the interest of justice and to prevent the commission of future crimes. This is an important moment in the process of justice before the ICC. The judges have reviewed the information and evidence submitted by the prosecutor and determined that there are credible allegations against these persons for the alleged crimes. The ICC is doing its part of work. As a court of law, the judges issued arrest warrants. Their execution depends on international cooperation.
It looks like this is just the beginning, and the forced transfer of children, which is actually an act of genocide, is the first formal reason on the basis of which the warrant was issued by the court. The accusation will be supplemented with new items. At one time, when a warrant was issued against Milosevic, he, being the current president, also scoffed and had fun about this, feeling his impunity. A few years later, he nevertheless appeared before the court, although he didn't live to see the verdict, ending his days in a cell in The Hague. And perhaps this option for Putin is much better than many others who expect him in Russia from their own. The warrant for Putin's arrest is important as a signal for those who hesitate. With such a label, a comrade does not get out. That is, if earlier Putin was perceived as something eternal and infinite, now everyone has been shown that Putin is finite. Take this into account in your personal strategies. It used to be a constant, now it is a variable.
This means that outside of Russia, Putin must be arrested and put on trial, and world leaders will think twice before shaking his hand or sitting down at the negotiation table with him. The world has received a signal that the Russian regime is criminal, and its leadership and henchmen will be brought to justice, to responsibility.
Currently, the Rome Statute, on the basis of which the International Criminal Court operates, has been ratified by more than 120 countries, and all of them should detain Putin as soon as he gets to these countries. At the same time, Russian justice, as expected, does not consider Putin a criminal and will not implement the decisions of the International Criminal Court.
Russia is not a party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and bears no obligations under it. Russia does not cooperate with this institute, and possible recipes for arrest coming from the International Court of Justice will be legally null and void for us.
It is clear that Zakharova is indeed a diplomat, because the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, generally wrote that there is no need to explain where this paper will be used, and by attaching a toilet paper smiley. In general, the Russians now seem to be competing on how to more sparingly ridicule the decision of the International Criminal Court. But that's okay. They are all so smart and funny now. We'll see how it ends. Maybe the Russian people themselves will bring Putin to the court. After all, a new wave of mobilization has begun in the country, not officially, but still. Already 6 regions have officially recognized that they are sending rights: Voronezh, Penza, Yaroslavl, Tyumeny regions, and the Khanty-Mansiysk Autonomous District, and the Republic of Mari El. But unofficially, this process has already started in at least 40 regions of Russia. I wonder what it would be. Maybe because of crazy losses. According to Lance Stubbs, the military advisors to the British delegation to the OSCE, Russia lost up to 30,000 killed and wounded in the battles near Bakhmut. More than 800 Russian soldiers are killed or wounded for every kilometer seized, most of whom are Wagnerians.
But this resource is limited only by the willingness of Russians to go to die in Ukraine. With each passing day of bloody battles near Bakhmut and in general on the Eastern Front, such readiness among the Russians is becoming less and less. Under existing conditions, this resource will not be inexhaustible, and in the event of an increase in the technological capabilities of the armed force of Ukraine, losses in manpower and equipment will inevitably increase.
But apart from ordinary Russians, the decision of the criminal court is a powerful signal for the Russian elites, no matter what position they are in. After all, even for extreme imperialists who dream of a great Russia, negotiations with the West look like a logical mechanism of politics, and for the Eastern and Southern partners, the president should be shaking hands. Therefore, both for the preservation of the system of power and the Russian Federation, as for democratization and even for the imperial project, Putin becomes an obstacle. Not right away, not now, but understanding is beginning to come to his entourage, and Putin is worried about his future. Until the last day, continued negotiations regarding the extension of the grain agreement, which allows the safe export of Ukrainian food products through the Black Sea. The terms of validity of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, concluded between Russia and Ukraine through the mediation of the United Nations and Turkey last July, expired on March 18th this year, and until Saturday, the parties tried to find a consensus for its extension. After all, the UN, Ukraine and Turkey called for an extension of the agreement for 120 days, and Russia agreed only for 60 days, without explaining why. I will make an assumption to try to bargain again in 2 months. Now the Russian side noted that the continuation of the package agreement on grain is possible only if the interests of Russian producers of agricultural products and fertilizers are taken into account in terms of unimpeded access to world markets. At the same time, we Ukrainians insist on an indefinite extension of the agreement, as it allows grain to be sent to countries experiencing a critical lack of grain.
Since the beginning of the initiative, we have managed to export over 24 million tons of food. With the Black Sea roads unblocked, we can export twice as much. Ukraine is one of the key links in the global food security. This is why we insist that the grain agreement be open-ended and automatically extended for 120 days. Turkey and the UN share the same position. The aggressors' attempts to shorten the extension period are a manipulation to further blackmail and escalate the global food crisis.
During the week, the Russian media, citing its diplomats, reported that the parties were able to reach an agreement, but only for 60 days. But the truth is that the Black Sea Agreement is prolonged for 120 days more. I will remind you that Russia has already tried to manipulate the grain agreement. On October 29, 2022, it announced that it would stop participating in the grain initiative. However, it resumed its participation in the grain agreement in just 3 days. And in another 2 weeks, the agreement was extended for 4 months more, and it ended on March the 18th. While defending itself from Russia's full-scale aggression, Ukraine has managed to export more than 50 million tons of food for hundreds of millions of people across the globe. We also support its coverage being expanded to Ukrainian ports in the Mykolaiv region. Russia has been repeatedly trying to disrupt the work of the grain initiative by blocking Ukrainian ports. Its policy of intended delays of the inspection vessels continued and seriously damaged the effectiveness of the grain corridor. For Ukraine's part, we fulfill all our obligations, previously agreed with the UN and Turkey as mediators of the deal, and all our partners are well aware of this. The international community must make it clear to Russia that it will not allow it to use food as a weapon ever again. Ukraine continues its consistent and fruitful cooperation with African countries by attracting a number of special ambassadors for President Zelensky's Grain from Ukraine humanitarian initiative. We call on countries around the globe to join the Grain from Ukraine initiative in order to create food hubs in Africa, in particular in those regions which are critically dependent on food imports. We call on countries around the globe to join our Grain from Ukraine initiative in order to create food hubs in Africa, in particular in the regions which are the most dependent on food imports. Before the decision of International Criminal Court on Vladimir Putin, China announced about a visit of Xi Jinping to Moscow. Now the Beijing decided what to do next. And about the actions of China and its leader, we will speak with Alexander Khara, a diplomat, fellow of the Center of Defense Strategies. Xi Jinping has been re-elected as the head of the Communist Party of China. It was legal to take only 2 terms as head of the Communist Party, but he changed the legislation to become the leader for the 3rd time. How will this affect the policy of China towards the United States and towards Ukraine? So what are the prospects of Ukrainian, Chinese and US-Chinese relations after this?
Firstly, someone old enough to remember the Soviet Union would recall the same scenes and the same moves by the party leaders in the Soviet Union. And those who are young enough can have a look at what's going on in Russia. So why I'm saying this, we can draw some parallels to what happened to the Soviet Union and Russia and might happen to China. I mean that the constitution has been changed in 2018 by the Communist Party and allowing Xi Jinping to lead the country for almost unlimited period of time. And Putin changed the constitution and gripped the power even more than it was before. In case of Xi Jinping, we've seen how Hu Jintao, the previous leader of the Communist Party, was walked away from the party meeting, party conference last year. And it's mean that there are no alternative views, no opposition, even within strictly controlled by the Communist Party, the body, the central body of the party and the government. So Xi Jinping now has a total control over the political and economic life of China, and he may turn it each way he wants. So this increases any, let's say, negative consequences of possible negative decisions taken by him and his lieutenants. Let's, for example, take example of COVID and zero COVID policies. The Chinese are saying that they've lost up to 100,000 people during these waves of COVID, though the economists calculated that up to 1.5 million of people might have died because of this management of the Communist Party of this huge problem, not just for China but for the globe as well. So what I'm saying that getting more and more power into one hands means that the price of any mistake or misdeed would be devastating. If we're talking about the let's say the key priorities voiced by Xi Jinping and his newly appointed leaders, so I mean the Prime Minister and some other leaders, they would be focused primarily on economy because of the negative consequences of COVID-19 on the Chinese economy. And after the 2-digit GDP growth throughout the last several decades, 2.2% in 2020, it's certainly not enough for China to recover. And the Chinese are setting a pretty modest figure of 5% GDP growth for this year. They can achieve this for sure. But there are some inherited problems of this communist rule that are difficult to cope with. First and foremost, it's the real estate crisis. And the Chinese government tried to manage it with, let's say, more restrictions of the reselling of the property and changing the taxation. and getting more taxes and revenues from taxes to Beijing and then redistributed to the local authorities. And it's created a huge problem. It's something like $5.1 trillion of debt of local governments that they should cope with. On top of that, there is at least $10 trillion owned by the local governments, also called local local government financial vehicles. So this is one of the key things, and he needs to have more political control over economy and over society to avoid civil unrest. So it's not everything good in China, and the middle class and especially younger people didn't want to be locked down in their apartments, so they went on street in several big cities. And certainly Xi Jinping might expect that it may happen again. So that's why he is more grip on society, on economy. He wants to show that after COVID, there is a new opportunity for businesses. But his previous actions proves his words wrong. I mean, look at let's say, champion of the Chinese business soft power, Jack Ma. He is hiding somewhere, either in Japan, Australia, and some other Western countries. He is not returning to PRC. And his companies, and especially his financial companies, are being overrun and being observed by the loyal to the Communist Party functionaries. Have a look at the Western, one of the Western businessmen, Mark Mobius, who is not able to get his money out of China because of restrictions, financial restrictions imposed on the businesses. So there are huge problems to the Chinese economy, and first and foremost to the way how Xi Jinping is running his government and is going to run his government. There are some other priorities, like investing more in green energy, and China is a leading investor in the new technology, in AI, and some other things. And certainly, given this competition and new restrictive measures against the transfer of technology to China, China needs to invest in its semiconductor industry. We know that Taiwan joined the Netherlands, the United States, and European partners in imposing export control on the most advanced semiconductors, and we know that chips are sort of a new gold in the economy of 21st century. So the Chinese need to cope with that. And finally, Xi Jinping is eyeing a possibility to solve possibly the most dear issue to his mind and to his heart, returning Taiwan into China and stopping the civil war in their mind. So that's why the Chinese government is going to speed up the military, military build-up and military financing, 7.5% increase for this year. And we might see more and more aggressive moves of the Chinese government towards China, or towards Taiwan. Recently, we've seen that underbed internet cables connecting Taiwan with the globe were cut, and there are suspicions that it was a Chinese operation. And during the last 2 years, we've seen numerous increases in numerous occasions when the PLA crafts and jets were violating air defense detection zone of Taiwan, showing and trying to coerce Taiwan. So we will see more and more aggressive rhetoric, more and more anti-Western in general, and with regard to Taiwan. And more assertive policies of China in the region and beyond. Today, we see how the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia signed a deal, and those two European or transatlantic nations will provide Australia with nuclear submarines, which certainly is a good sign that the West is tuned to deter China from any aggressive moves against Taiwan. It would be certainly a huge mistake to make such a move. So in the coming years, we will see more and more competition, more and more hostilities, and more economic or trade wars between the United States and China and some European countries or European Union in general, because they are not happy with the course Xi Jinping took for his country, not to develop economy, not to get Chinese people out of poverty, which is good thing, has been a good thing for several decades. But now he is on the move to let's say, advance more ephemeral, more, let's say, abstract goals of prestige, of jubilation of the Chinese nation, which is seen to get Taiwan back to China. And if we are talking about Ukraine, just on the eve of the 1 year of 9 years anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, China published its position paper on the Chinese position with regard to the so-called political resolution of Ukrainian crisis. And it says a lot. China was shy enough not to vote for 3 important General Assembly's resolutions regarding Ukraine. In 2014, China abstained when the resolution on the territorial integrity of Ukraine was voted. In 2022, when Russia launched its full-out invasion of Ukraine, China abstained, not calling the Russian invasion actually invasion. And on the 24th of February this year, China didn't vote for the peace proposal based on the UN Charter. And now they are pushing forward their plan or sort of vision of the solution of Ukraine-Russia war. And actually, if you have a look at the 12 points that are in this plan, or rather position, it's not really about Ukraine. It's rather about China, the US relations than actually stopping the Russian war against Ukraine. The most important points from this position are non-use of nuclear arms against Ukraine, and secondly, it's the humanitarian aspect of returning prisoners of war, exchange of prisoners of war. If we are talking about the first point, which is territorial integrity and sovereignty, China didn't mention Ukraine there. So that's why I suppose they meant Taiwan, rather the Crimea and other illegally occupied and annexed territories of Ukraine. So they just didn't find it's reasonable to put Ukraine in the first point of the so-called peace plan. Not to mention the other points, like not to return to the Cold War mentality, which means that China doesn't want the West to be united in its opposition to the Russian aggression and united in its position to deter China from taking over Taiwan by forceful means. The same thing with chains of supplies. It's not about Ukraine. It's about the Western actions, how to secure access to rare materials and to chips as well. That's why the United States is investing a huge amount of money in semiconductor production industry in the United States. And Taiwan is investing in Arizona plant, and in Japan is thinking about establishing a new production facilities somewhere in Europe. So this so-called peace plan is not about actually Ukraine. It's about Chinese interests with regard to the United States. And we heard that China is waging possibility to supply weapons to Russia. I should recall that China is buying more and more Russian energy resources, thus fueling the war machine in Russia. China is supplying directly or indirectly, like via Turkey, more and more chips to Russian Federation, so they can be installed in those missiles that are hitting Ukrainian cities. And now they are considering providing some more weapons, like missiles, possibly ammunition, and possibly drones, which is fueling this war, and which is making China complicit with war crimes committed by the aggressor state. So that's why all those words that China is impartial, that China is interested in the peace broker role in our conflict with Russia, which is not true. China is pushing pro-Russian narratives that Ukraine is not an actor. And it's managed by the United States and some other countries. And that's why Chinese are trying to talk about so-called peace initiatives directly to the United States and Russia. Should I remind that one of the top foreign policy figures, Wang Yi, after the Munich Security Conference went to Moscow, he missed his opportunity to visit Kiev and talk to President Zelensky. He flew to Moscow to talk about their peace proposals, and they were overall accepted by Moscow. And then Mr. Lukashenko, the so-called president of Belarus, was in Beijing, and he accepted and he supported this so-called peace proposal as well. It says a lot that, if an aggressor state and his minion is supporting peace plan, there is something wrong with this peace plan for Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Your answer is very comprehensive for us. In fact, you covered 3 of 4 my questions in a row. But that leads me, I believe, to the final question, and the most important one. Is China, Belarus and the Russian Federation, Iran and North Korea are forming an anti-democratic coalition? So the anti-Western coalition of states to the United States, to the European Union and Ukraine as part of the European community and the Western world as a whole. Are they generating this coalition or the anti-democratic front, to call it so?
Well, de facto, those countries you mentioned are revisionist countries. They are not happy with the world order that been established after the Second World War, with some changes after the collapse of the Empire of Evil. And they are interested in changing it in different ways, in different pace. For example, China might wait some time to change the system slowly, gradually, without, let's say, conflict. While the Russian Federation and Belarus is trying to speed up this process because they see that the window of opportunity is closing down. So yes, de facto they are sort of axis of those revisionist powers. They are not democracies, even though they pretend to be as such. But from the other hand, there are limits to this no-limit partnership between Russia and China. Because China wants to have its hands free for the future. They believe that 21st century would be a Chinese century, and that's why they don't need to be tied by the junior and weaker partner that is making such a huge mistakes like invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and more recently in 2022, because it showed that Russia just experiencing is a geopolitical overstretch. It's in such a weak position after a year of intensive war with Ukraine that it might collapse. And it's not an interest of China that Russia would collapse. They need to support somehow the Russians, but below the threshold of angering the West and in the West imposing sanctions over China if there is a direct involvement in supply of weapons and some other things. So the Russia as well is not interested in the union with China, because the Russians believe there are 3 major powers on earth. It's the United States, Russia, and China. And that's why they want to play their own role as a geopolitical center or pole. They don't want to be a part of Chinese-led alliance. But from the other hand, they are useless and pointless and devastating for Russia war, pushes them closer to China, and they are actually becoming a sort of resource subsidy to the Chinese ambitions. But anyway, we will see a more, let's say, united front from those nations, and they are influencing some other nations in the so-called global south. But with more and more hostilities, like in a war in Ukraine, or let's say more tensions in the Indo-Pacific and some other regions, the rest of the world need to decide which path they are on. Either they are with the free nations who are preaching international law in rules-based order, or they are with China, India, India is one of the countries that need to decide, because now it's playing a bit, let's say, the ambivalent role, not really criticizing Russia, but from the other hand, not supporting Russian actions. They're trying to make advantage of the Russian position, buying more and more resources and weapons. But from the other hand, they're not joining the West in deterring Russia from further aggression in Ukraine or elsewhere. So we will see this polarization more and more in the future, and we will see more and more chaos in our system, because obviously the West is losing some ground. The center of economic activities is shifting to the east. That's why the West could not play the same role as the only geopolitical pole that is running the international system. I'm not talking about decline of the West, not at all. But I'm saying that a bit of power and global responsibilities would shift to Asia. And we will see new rules established in different regions and competitive rules, because, for example, once again, this AUKUS agreement that is signed today is something to play. And Quad with India will play a bigger role in the future. So China will need to react somehow to that and needs to find additional resources, and especially in such a dire strait for its economy. So yes, we will see more and more turbulence, more and more hostile rhetoric. I don't believe that the United States and China will find a common ground with regard to their economic and the strategic competition. The Republicans and Democrats in the United States and all possible candidates for the presidential office in 2024 are set to compete with China even more aggressively than Joseph Biden. So we will see more and more hostile rhetoric and actions on parts of both sides. I mean, China and the United States. And certainly it's not the world that we would love to live in. And certainly we would love to see some calm down of all those sides. Certainly we would love to see this war being stopped, and China has a say. If China have said to Putin that, we are not going to provide you with resources, you need to find a compromise based on the UN Charter. So you need to leave all those illegally annexed and occupied territories, including Crimea, and we will arrange some kind of security guarantees for you. It would be nice, but Chinese are siding with Russia. They are not interested in the solving of Ukrainian problems in line with UN Charter. They are pursuing egoistic national interests, and they are siding with Russia to let's say oppose the West in general. So it's unfortunately it's not going to change, and especially with more grip on power by Xi Jinping.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. I'll remind you that Alexander Khara was with us, a diplomat, fellow of the Center of Defense Strategies. It was Pavlo Shteremach on UATV channel explaining hard scenes in easy terms directly from Ukraine. Stay safe and stay tuned for more.